Thanks very much for staying with us. Time now for Eye on Africa with me, Georgia Calvin-Smith. Tonight, a peace deal's finally signed in Central African Republic. It's aimed at ending years of bloody conflict in which thousands have died, but it's the latest in a long line of similar accords. Also, a new document by the French Secret Service dating back from 1994's resurfaced, suggesting that it's likely Hutu extremists shot down the Rwandan president's plane that year. That attack sparked the genocide of the Tutsis, in which around 800,000 people were killed. And ahead of elections due later this year, many Tunisian youth, the first victims of soaring unemployment, feel disenfranchised. France 24 visits working-class neighbourhoods in Tunis to meet with this young generation, many of whom are struggling to get by. But first, Central African Republic and over a dozen armed militia leaders have signed a hard-fought peace pact aimed at ending years of brutal conflict.
And history will judge us severely if we fail in our responsibilities.
Well, President Faustin Archange Touadéra, called for the building of a new Central African Republic at the official signing ceremony in Bangui on Wednesday. The deal was first initialed in Khartoum, Sudan, a day earlier after the African Union brokered talks there between the Central African government and militia groups. The conflicts left thousands dead, and there are fears that, if left unchecked, the crisis could have driven the country into famine. Now, this accord is the 8th attempt at a peace deal in just 6 years. Louisa Lombard is a professor at Yale University in the States. She's written several books looking at the origins of the Central African Republic conflict. She joins us now. Louisa, thanks very much for speaking to us. Now, what do you think is different about this deal? Does it have any better chance of sticking than those that came before?
Well, one thing that is quite different about this peace deal is that we heard that there was a peace deal before it had even been signed. That was kind of a new development. But unfortunately, I think it's the similarities with the previous peace deals that are more important. In particular, the fact that there have been regional and international actors who have been pushing and being the driving force behind the peace process, and whose interest is to have a deal reached as quickly as possible. And I'm afraid that that's part of what we've seen in this case as well. That the emphasis has been on getting something signed as quickly as possible, rather than necessarily really dealing with some of the root causes of what's causing this violence in the country.
So what are some of the root causes? I mean, this particular period of instability is traced back to the ousting of President Francois Bozizé back in 2012. But the reason for the fighting, and even identifying those who are involved, has become increasingly complex over the years. What, as far as you can say, are the dynamics of the conflict in Central African Republic as it stands at the moment?
Well, and this is precisely why it's been so difficult to bring this fighting to an end, is that there's no 10-second version. There's no one-sentence version of what has been going on and why the fighting is happening. In fact, there are a whole lot of different contentious issues that are being fought over in violent ways, and contentious issues that get expressed both on a local level and respond to different kinds of local tensions in particular regions of the country, and then also on a national level and in terms of sort of national belonging. But if we're going to speak very schematically about what some of the tensions are, one really big one is the question of nationality and who properly is a Central African and who is not, who has a right to benefit from being in Central Africa and who is not. A number of the rebel groups get described by some Central African as foreign, as foreigners, as not people who belong. But some of those members of those groups see themselves as, in fact, Central African. That's one thing that's being fought over. Another is over people who are living perhaps more itinerantly in the form of cattle herders or others, and the kinds of conflicts that they have with farmers and others who are living in the areas where they're operating. Another has to do with certain dynamics around warlordism and profiting from armed conflict and from being an armed group. Another has to do with who gets to be part of the national government and the kinds of benefits that accrue to that. So there are really many different layers that all map onto each other in a really complex way. And that's part of why it's been so difficult to bring the country out of this really tragic situation that it's in.
And what has the toll of the conflict been on Central African Republic?
Oh, it's been enormous. And it's really tragic because when you look at some of the humanitarian statistics, you find that things are absolutely not getting better. In fact, they might even be getting worse. The rates of displacement in the country today are at their highest levels that they've ever been. It's about 1 in 4 Central Africans are living away from their homes. The economy is completely in a tatters. Nobody has escaped having this conflict have an effect on them. And for some people, they have felt it in the form of physical violence. For other people, they have felt it in the form of having to flee their homes. For other people, they have felt it in the form of new instability and uncertainty in their lives and loss of loved ones. So it's really had incredibly wide-ranging and quite tragic effects.
Thanks very much. Louisa Lombard, the professor at Yale University, talking to us about the situation in Central African Republic as a fresh peace deal is signed there between the government and various warring militia groups. Well, in other news, French media has published a document by the French Secret Service from 1994. That document says it's likely that Hutu extremists shot down the Rwandan president's plane that year. Now, that attack sparked the genocide of the Tutsis. 800,000 people were killed within just 3 months. Ever since the genocide, experts have argued about who shot down the plane, the Tutsi rebellion led by current President Paul Kagame or Hutu extremists. Nicolas Chemin tells us more.
The 6th of April 2019 will mark the 25th anniversary of the Rwandan genocide. 800,000 people were killed, most of them from the minority Tutsi ethnic group. The attack against Hutu President Habyarimana's plane sparked the massacres. In France, a first investigation had concluded that the Tutsi rebellion led by Paul Kagame had shot down the plane. But a later investigation said Hutu extremists had probably fired the missiles. On Wednesday, Radio France and the Mediapart News website said they had a note from the French Secret Service from September 1994. According to the journalists, this document says 2 of the regime's extremists, Colonels Théoneste Bagosora, former chief of staff of the defense minister, and Laurent Serubuga, former head of the Rwandan army, were the main orchestrators of the attack of the 6th of April 1994. They asked Hubert Védrine for his reaction. He was a senior advisor to French President François Mitterrand at the time. He said it's possible there were many documents from different sources that considered both hypotheses. The relationship between France and Rwanda was acrimonious for years. In 2014, Kagame said France, that supported the Habyarimana regime, had taken part in the genocide. But since Emmanuel Macron's election in 2017, the situation has changed dramatically. He was only 16 at the time of the genocide. And last year, he backed the Rwandan candidate to be head of the International Francophone Organization. Louise Mushikiwabo, a very close ally of Paul Kagame, won that election last October.
In South Africa, a whistleblower over the alleged corruption at the Bosasa contracting company was among 6 suspects arrested on Wednesday in an investigation into government corruption. Angelo Agrizzi, who was the former chief operations officer at Bosasa, was later released on bail. He'd earlier testified before judges looking into claims that around 105 million euros was allegedly stolen in tender deals between the Department of Correctional Services and Bosasa. Agrizzi told the commission that the company had made monthly payments of around 2,000 euros to the Jacob Zuma Foundation. President Jacob Zuma resigned last February, dogged by multiple corruption scandals. Now, 75% of youth and women aren't planning on voting in Tunisia's 2019 elections. Many Tunisians are disillusioned with politics, and youth, the first victims of soaring unemployment, are struggling to believe that their say will make much of a difference. Our correspondents report.
Krem West is a suburb of Tunis. The neighborhood's youth center, deserted after the revolution, has since been revived. It's an initiative of Mogdioun, an association that assembled a group of high school students to write a play about their neighborhood.
We were inspired by the real-life situation of these youths, their experiences both good and bad. From here, we built characters, asking young people what they wanted to show.
Many here are trying to present their own perspective on working-class neighborhoods, which are often stigmatized as hotspots of crime and delinquency. Before Mogdioun's initiative, 16-year-old Esma had never stepped foot inside the youth center.
It's up to us as young people to change the image that society has of us. It's up to us to make our voices heard, to change things, to come up with solutions.
Habib is a freelance journalist in Douar Hishir, one of Tunis's most densely populated neighborhoods. He writes about politics and social issues.
If you go now and search Douar Hishir on the internet or YouTube, you'll find only negative images of the neighborhood. In reality, the situation is much different.
Locals say many are proud of their neighborhoods and are happy to get involved in looking after it. Here, a group of unemployed youth have begun mapping Douar Hishir's more recently developed areas.
The area where we're standing now hasn't been registered by the municipality of Douar Hishir. We're doing the digital mapping of this neighborhood using a phone app, and then we'll transfer everything onto the computer database.
By helping the municipality, these youth are rekindling citizen participation at the local level, a concept that many, disillusioned by the country's politics and unemployment, had given up on.
This kind of initiative will not magically solve all of our problems, but it's a first step to show that we're doing something. We're not just saying nothing is happening or no one is helping us.
But being proactive in their community can only go so far in a country where 30% of college graduates remain unemployed.
Well, that's it for Eye on Africa for now. Thanks for joining us, and do so again if you can. Take care.
500,000 families evicted from their homes. 80% of construction firms bankrupt. Ghost towns. 30% unemployment. Public sector wages reduced and taxes increased. Spain, shortly after the economic crisis of 2008. Today things look better, but what price has been paid?
We revisit Spain's economic crisis all this week on France 24.